I stood in my front yard, holding a $150 fine notice in my trembling hands, staring at the tomato plants that had been my grandmother's legacy. They wanted me to rip them out. Over my dead body. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I never thought a garden would change my entire life. But here I am in June 2024, about to tell you how a handful of seeds turned into the biggest battle Meadowbrook community ever witnessed. It started innocently enough on a bright Saturday morning in April 2024. I was 32 years old, working as a high school biology teacher, and I had just inherited my grandmother's most prized possession, her collection of heirloom seeds. Grammy Rose had been a master gardener, and these seeds represented 4 generations of careful cultivation. Cherokee purple tomatoes, Kentucky wonder beans, mortgage lifter tomatoes, and her secret variety of zucchini that she developed over 20 years. I lived at 42 Maple Drive in the Meadowbrook HOA community. It was one of those perfectly manicured suburban neighborhoods where every lawn looked like a golf course and every mailbox matched. I'd bought the house 3 years earlier, attracted by the good schools nearby and the affordable price. The HOA fees were $225 per month, which seemed reasonable at the time. That April morning, I was outside planning my garden. My backyard was modest, about 800 square feet of usable space, but it got beautiful sunlight. I sketched out where I'd plant Grammys, tomatoes, the beans, and maybe some herbs near the back fence. "What are you doing?" A sharp voice cut through my thoughts. I looked up to see Karen Hendricks standing at my fence line. Karen lived next door at 44 Maple Drive, and she had a reputation. She'd been on the HOA board for 7 years before Barbara Thompson took over as president 2 years ago. Karen had never quite gotten over losing that election, and she made it her personal mission to enforce every single HOA rule with religious fervor. Karen was in her mid-50s, with severely cut blonde hair and a permanent expression like she'd just smelled something rotten. She wore a pristine white tennis outfit, though I'd never seen her actually play tennis. "Planning my vegetable garden," I replied pleasantly. I'd learned early on that being friendly with Karen was the best strategy, even if she never returned the courtesy. Her eyes narrowed. "Vegetable garden. Did you submit an application to the Architectural Review Committee?" I blinked. "Application? It's just some tomatoes and beans in my backyard." Section 8, Paragraph 12 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that any modification to landscaping, including but not limited to the installation of gardens, requires written approval 30 days in advance. Karen pulled out her phone and started typing furiously. "I'm documenting this violation right now." My stomach sank. "Karen, these are my grandmother's heirloom seeds. She just passed away 3 months ago. This is really important to me." "Rules are rules, Sarah. If we let everyone plant whatever they want, this whole neighborhood will look like a farmer's market. Property values will plummet." She continued typing. "I'm sending this to Barbara Thompson and the board right now." I watched her march back to her house, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. A vegetable garden? Needed board approval? I'd read through the HOA documents when I bought the house, but I didn't remember that rule. That evening, I pulled out my copy of the HOA. It was a 147-page document, written in dense legal language. After 2 hours of reading, I found it buried in Section 8, Paragraph 12, Subsection D. Any resident wishing to install vegetable gardens, fruit trees, or non-approved plant species must submit detailed plans to the Architectural Review Committee for approval. Processing time, 30 to 45 days. Application fee, $75. $75 just to apply to plant my own vegetables in my own backyard. This was insane. The next Monday, I decided to visit Barbara Thompson, our HOA president. Barbara lived at 80 in Oak Street in one of the nicer houses in the development. She was in her early 40s, with warm brown eyes and an actual sense of humor, which was rare among HOA board members I'd encountered. Barbara answered the door in casual jeans and a gardening shirt, with dirt under her fingernails. "Sarah, come in, come in." I was just repotting some orchids. Her home was lovely, filled with plants of all kinds. Orchids, ferns, Even a small lemon tree in her sunroom. We sat in her kitchen, and she made us both tea. "I got Karen's email," Barbara said, her expression sympathetic, "about your vegetable garden. Is this rule actually enforced? I mean, it seems kind of extreme for some tomato plants in my backyard." Barbara sighed heavily. "Unfortunately, yes. Karen pushed this rule through about 6 years ago when she was board president. She was worried about unsightly vegetable gardens bringing down property values. The rule technically applies to any vegetables or fruits visible from the street or neighboring properties. But my backyard isn't visible from the street. You'd have to stand in Karen's yard to see it." "I know, but Karen has made it clear she intends to enforce this. She's already submitted a formal complaint." Barbara pulled out a folder. "Here's the thing, Sarah. I personally think this rule is ridiculous. I've been trying to get it changed for 2 years, but I need a majority vote from the board. And Karen's allies outnumber mine right now. So what do? You submit an application. I'll make sure it gets approved quickly. Pay the $75 fee, include photos or drawings of your proposed garden, and specify what you're planting. I can probably get you approved in 2 weeks instead of 30 days. I left Barbara's house feeling slightly better, but still frustrated. $75 in paperwork just to mar my grandmother's memory had felt. Doble wrote. I submitted my application the next day. I included beautiful photos of Grammy's seeds, explained their heritage and importance to my family, and drew detailed diagrams of my planned garden. I even included photos of similar gardens that looked tasteful and well-maintained. 2 weeks later, I got my approval. Barbara had been true to her word. The letter stated that I could proceed with my vegetable garden as outlined in my application. With certain restrictions, plants must be maintained, weeds must be controlled, and the garden must remain aesthetically pleasing. That weekend in May 2024, I began planting. It was therapeutic, working the soil with my hands, placing each precious seed exactly where Grammy would have wanted them. As I worked, I thought about her, about summer afternoons in her garden, about the taste of sun-warmed tomatoes picked right off the vine. Karen watched from her window. I could see her curtains moving. But I had my approval letter, so I kept working. My garden grew beautifully. Early June. The tomato plants were nearly 3 feet tall, lush and green. The bean vines were climbing their trellis. Everything was thriving. I spent every evening after work tending to my plants, watering, pruning, checking for pests. Then, on June 15, 2024, I came home to find an official HOA notice taped to my front door. Violation notice. The garden located at 42 Maple Drive exceeds the approved height specifications. Per your approved application, plants were not to exceed 36 inches in height. Current measurements show plants at 42 to 48 inches. Fine, $150. Plants must be trimmed to compliant height within 7 days, or additional fines of $50 per day will be assessed. I read it 3 times, unable to believe what I was seeing. They wanted me to cut down my healthy, thriving tomato plants because they were growing too well. I marched straight to Karen's house and knocked firmly on her door. She answered with a satisfied smile. "I assume you got the notice." "Karen, you can't be serious. You want me to mutilate healthy plants because they grew better than expected? You specified in your application that plants would not exceed 3 feet. Your current plants exceed that specification. That's a violation of your approved plan." She crossed her arms. "I measured them myself with my tape measure. 42 inches on the Cherokee Purple. 48 inches on the Mortgage Lifter. They're tomato plants. They grow. That's what plants do. Then you should have specified accurate maximum heights in your application. This is your responsibility, Sarah. Pay the fine and trim your plants, or face additional penalties." She closed the door in my face. I stood there, shaking with anger and frustration. This wasn't about rules or property values. This was Karen punishing me because she could, because she'd lost her power, and this was the only way she could still control people. I called Barbara that evening. She was furious when I told her what happened. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Barbara said. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Karen is out of control." "Will it help? You said she has allies on the board." "I don't know, Sarah, but I have to try. This isn't what HOAs are supposed to be about. We're supposed to maintain the community, not terrorize residents over tomato plants." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for June 22, 2024, 7 days away. Exactly when my daily fines would start accumulating if I didn't comply. I spent that week researching HOA law, reading community guidelines from other neighborhoods, and documenting everything. I took daily photos of my garden, measured my plants, and created a detailed timeline of events. I also started talking to my neighbors. I knocked on doors up and down Maple Drive, Oak Street, and Birch Lane. What I discovered shocked me. Karen had filed violations against 17 different households in the past 6 months alone. Mrs. Patterson at 61 Oak Street got fined $200 because her roses grew over her mailbox. The Johnsons at 33 Birch Lane were fined $350 because their kids' basketball hoop was 2 inches over the height limit. The Rodriguez family at 57 Maple Drive faced $800 in fines because their teenager painted a mural on their backyard fence, which was only visible from their own yard. Everyone was afraid of Karen. They paid the fines quietly because they didn't want to make waves or get targeted further. But they were all miserable. "We're thinking of moving," Mrs. Patterson told me sadly. She was 73 years old and had lived in Meadowbrook for 20 years. "I can't afford these constant fines on my fixed income, and I can't bear to cut back my roses. My husband planted them before he died." That broke my heart, and it made me angry. Really, truly angry. The night before the board meeting, I made a decision. I wasn't going to trim my plants. I wasn't going to pay the fine. I was going to fight this. Not just for me, but for every resident Karen had bullied and intimidated. I stayed up until 2 in the morning preparing a presentation. I printed photos, compiled testimonials from neighbors, created charts showing Karen's violation patterns, and researched comparable HOA communities with more reasonable rules. The board meeting was at 7 p.m. on June 22nd at the community center. When I arrived at 6:45, I was shocked to see the parking lot nearly full. Word had spread. Dozens of residents had come to support me, or maybe to finally stand up to Karen themselves. I walked into the meeting room carrying my folder of evidence, my heart pounding. Barbara sat at the head table with 4 other board members. Karen sat to Barbara's right, looking supremely confident. The room was packed. I recognized Mrs. Patterson, the Johnsons, the Rodriguez family, and at least 30 other residents. Some I'd talked to, others I'd never met. Barbara called the meeting to order. "We're here tonight to discuss the violation notice issued to Sarah Mitchell regarding her vegetable garden." "Sarah, you have the floor." I stood up, my hand shaking slightly. I'd rehearsed this 100 times, but now, facing everyone, my mouth went dry. Then I looked at Mrs. Patterson's encouraging smile, at the Johnsons' hopeful faces, at all these neighbors who'd been pushed around for too long. I found my voice. "Thank you, Barbara. Board members, neighbors, I want to tell you about my grandmother, Rose Anderson. She passed away 3 months ago at 87 years old. Grammy Rose was a master gardener who spent 60 years developing her own seed varieties. When she died, she left me her most precious possession, 4 generations of heirloom seeds. I held up a photo of Grammy in her garden, smiling broadly, surrounded by tomato plants. I planted those seeds to honor her memory. I followed every rule. I paid the $75 application fee. I submitted detailed plans. I got approval from this board, and I've maintained my garden meticulously. It's beautiful, healthy, and harmful to absolutely no one. I pulled out the violation notice. Then I received this, $150 fine because my tomato plants grew better than expected. Because they're thriving. Because I'm actually good at the thing I applied for permission to do. I looked directly at Karen. But this isn't really about my tomatoes, is it? This is about control. This is about someone who can't stand seeing other people happy if they're not, following arbitrary rules designed to make life harder. Karen's face turned red. That's completely inappropriate. This is about maintaining community standards. Is it? I pulled out my compiled research. Because I've documented 17 violations you filed in the past 6 months alone, fines totaling $3,275 against your neighbors. 4 roses growing too tall. 4 basketball hoops 2 inches over a limit. 4 art on a fence that's not even visible from the street. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People started murmuring. Mrs. Pattison is considering moving after 20 years here because she can't afford your constant fines on her fixed income. The Rodriguez family is taking out a loan to pay their penalties. All because someone decided that control was more important than community. I turned to the board. I'm not just fighting for my tomatoes tonight. I'm fighting for every resident who's been bullied by unreasonable enforcement of unreasonable rules. And I'm asking this board to finally stand up and say, enough is enough. The room erupted in applause. People stood up, cheering. Barbara was trying to restore order, but even she looked moved. Karen stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly. This is an ambush. These people are trying to destroy the property values we've worked so hard to maintain. If we let everyone do whatever they want, this community will fall apart. Sit down, Karen, Barbara said firmly. You'll get your chance to speak. But Karen wasn't done. She pointed at me, her face twisted with rage. You want to know what this is really about? Fine, I'll tell you. This is about people who move into a community with established rules and then want to change everything to suit themselves. This is about entitlement. This is about Karen. Barbara's voice was sharp. Sit down. Now. The room went silent. Karen remained standing for a long moment, breathing heavily. Then she grabbed her purse. I don't have to listen to this. I've given 7 years to this community, and this is the thanks I get. Fine. Do whatever you want. Ruin this neighborhood. See if I care? She stormed toward the door, but before she left, she turned back to me one final time. This isn't over, Sarah. Not by a long shot. You have no idea what you've just started. The door slammed behind Karen, leaving the room in shocked silence. Barbara looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Concern mixed with something else. Pride, maybe, or worry. Then she said 4 words that made my blood run cold. We need to vote now. All those in favor of rescinding Sarah's violation and reforming our enforcement policies. ... double quotes. What do you think happened next? Did the board side with Barbara or Karen? Have you ever dealt with an unreasonable Drop your experiences in the comments below. And stick around because this story takes a turn nitrogen monoxide one saw coming. The silence in the community center was deafening after Karen's dramatic exit. Barbara's words hung in the air like a challenge. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was Italiano, the moment that would determine whether I'd have to destroy my grandmother's legacy or stand up to tyranny. Barbara cleared her throat and straightened her papers. As I was saying, we need to vote on 2 motions tonight. First, to rescind the violation notice issued to Sarah Mitchell. Second, to review and reform our current enforcement policies, particularly regarding garden regulations. Michael Chun, one of the board members, raised his hand. He was in his late 30s, an architect who'd moved to Meadowbrook 3 years ago. Barbara, can I speak? Of course. Michael stood, adjusting his glasses. I've served on this board for 18 months, and in that time, I've watched us become the neighborhood nobody wants to live in. My own sister was looking at houses here last year. You know what changed her mind? She heard about our HOA reputation, said we sounded like we valued rules over people. He picked up a stack of papers. I pulled our violation records for the past 3 years. Karen has filed 82% of all violations. 82%. That's 237 complaints out of 289 total. The fines collected have totaled $41,300 over 3 years. Gasps erupted throughout the room. Even I was shocked. $41,000. And here's what really concerns me, Michael continued. Only 12 of those violations were for legitimate safety issues. Things like broken fences that could hurt someone, or dead trees that might fall. The other 225 were for aesthetic issues. Paint colors, garden gnomes, holiday decorations left up 3 days too long, basketball hoops, vegetable gardens. He looked directly at where Karen had been sitting. I didn't speak up before, because I thought maybe I was new and didn't understand the community standards. But tonight, seeing Sarah's presentation, seeing all these neighbors here, I realized I should have said something a year ago. Barbara nodded solemnly. Thank you, Michael. Anyone else? Dorothy Martinez stood up. She was in her 60s, had been on the board for 5 years, and I'd always assumed she was one of Karen's allies. I'd like to say something. My heart sank. Here it comes, I thought. I owe everyone here an apology, Dorothy said, her voice thick with emotion. Especially you, Sarah. I voted for many of these rules when Karen was president. I thought we were protecting property values. I thought we were maintaining standards. But tonight opened my eyes. She pulled out a tissue and dabbed at her eyes. My granddaughter visited last month. She's 7 years old. She wanted to draw a hopscotch on my driveway with chalk primera tooled. I told her the HOA doesn't allow it. My 7-year-old granddaughter asked me why I live somewhere that doesn't allow children to play. Her voice broke. I didn't have a good answer. Because there isn't one. We've turned this neighborhood into a place where children can't draw on their own driveways, where people can't grow tomatoes to remember their grandmothers, where we fine elderly people on fixed incomes until they have to move away. She looked at Barbara. Ibote? Yes. Yes to rescinding Sarah's violation. Yes to reforming our policies. Yes to remembering that a community is made of people, not rules. The room erupted in applause again. I felt tears streaming down my face. The other 2 board members, Richard Foster and Janet Wu, both spoke in favor of the reforms. Richard admitted he'd been to passive. Janet revealed she'd almost resigned twice because she was so uncomfortable with the enforcement patterns. Barbara called for the vote. All in favor of rescinding Sarah Mitchell's violation notice and refunding her $150 fine. 5 hands went up. It was unanimous, all in favor of forming a committee to review and reform our HOA enforcement policies, with particular attention to garden regulations and aesthetic violations. 5 hands again. Unanimous. The room exploded. People were cheering, hugging, some were crying. Mrs. Patterson grabbed my hands. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for being braver than the rest of us. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen's parting words echoed in my mind. This isn't over, Sarah. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I was in my classroom preparing for my biology students when my phone rang. It was Barbara. Sarah, we have a problem. My stomach dropped. What kind of problem? Karen filed a lawsuit this morning. Against the HOA, against me personally as president, and against you. I sat down heavily in my desk chair. On what grounds? She's claiming we violated HOA procedures by not following proper notice requirements for board meetings. She's claiming we staged an ambush. She's alleging that you and I conspired to undermine the HOA's authority, and she's suing for emotional distress, claiming our actions have caused her severe psychological harm. I felt dizzy. Can she do that? Her lawyer seems to think so. I'm meeting with our HOA attorney at 2 this afternoon. Can you be there? I have classes until 3:15. Can you get coverage? This is important, Sarah. Her lawsuit is asking for damages of $50,000 from the $25,000 from me personally, and $25,000 from you. My blood ran cold. $25,000. I was a teacher. I had student loans. I had a mortgage. I didn't have that kind of money. I'll be there, I said quietly. I called the principal's office and explained I had a family emergency. My colleague Marcus covered my afternoon classes. At 1:45, I was sitting in the law offices of Patterson and Associates downtown, waiting for Barbara. She arrived, looking exhausted. "I didn't sleep at all last night," she admitted. "I kept thinking about what Karen said, that I had no idea what I'd started." The attorney, David Patterson, was a thin man in his 50s, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. He reviewed the lawsuit carefully while Barbara and I sat in nervous silence. Finally, he looked up. "Okay, here's the situation. Karen's lawsuit has three main claims. First, procedural violation regarding the emergency board meeting. Second, conspiracy to undermine HOA governance. Third, emotional distress." He tapped his pen on the papers. "The good news is that two of these claims are extremely weak. You followed proper emergency meeting procedures. Barbara, you notified all board members. You posted public notice 72 hours in advance, and you allowed public comment. The conspiracy claim is even weaker. There's no conspiracy in residents organizing to present concerns at a public meeting." "And the emotional distress claim?" I asked. David grimaced. "That's trickier. Emotional distress claims are hard to prove, but they're also hard to dismiss outright. Karen's lawyer will argue that the public confrontation, the loss of her standing in the community, and the board's rejection of her enforcement philosophy caused genuine psychological harm." "So what do we do?" Barbara asked. "We file a motion to dismiss the procedural and conspiracy claims immediately. Those should be thrown out within 30 days. The emotional distress claim will likely go to discovery, which means both sides exchange evidence and take depositions. That process typically takes 3 to 6 months. 6 months? I felt sick. How much will this cost? The HOA's insurance covers defense costs for actions taken in official capacity. So Barbara, you're protected. Sarah, you were acting as a resident at a public meeting, so you should also be covered under the HOA's liability policy. However, he paused. If the court finds in Karen's favor, you could be personally liable for damages. I swallowed hard. What are the chances of that? Low. Maybe 10 to 15%, but not 0. I left the law office feeling like my world was crumbling. I'd stood up for what was right, and now I might lose everything. The next 2 weeks were brutal. Word of the lawsuit spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Some residents were supportive, bringing me casseroles and flowers, thanking me for my courage. Others avoided eye contact at the grocery store, probably afraid of being dragged into legal drama. Then, on a Tuesday morning 2 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, I got a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Riverside Park, noon, North Picnic Area. Come alone. I have information about Karen you need to hear." A friend. Every instinct told me this was probably a trap. But curiosity won out. At 11:55, I parked near the North Picnic Area of Riverside Park. It was a beautiful spot overlooking the river, with tall oak trees providing shade. A woman was sitting at one of the picnic tables. Her back to me. As I approached, she turned around. I recognized her immediately. Patricia Hendricks, Karen's younger sister. "Thank you for coming." Patricia Said. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting with a manila envelope. I know this is weird, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. I sat down across from her cautiously. "What's this about?" "It's about Karen, and the real reason she's so obsessed with HOA rules." Patricia slid the envelope across the table. "This is going to sound crazy, but my sister isn't well. Mentally, I mean." I opened the envelope. Inside were medical records, printed emails, and what looked like court documents. Patricia's voice was barely above a whisper. 3 years ago, Karen was fired from her job. She worked in property management for a large commercial real estate company. She was let go for, and I quote, "excessive and inappropriate enforcement of tenant regulations leading to hostile work environment complaints." I scanned the documents. It was all there. Termination letter, complaints from tenants, even a restraining order from one tenant who'd claimed Karen was harassing them. After she lost her job, Karen spiraled. Patricia continued. She became obsessed with control. Her therapist diagnosed her with obsessive-compulsive disorder and some other things I don't fully understand. She was supposed to be on medication, but she stopped taking it about 2 years ago, right around the time she lost the HOA presidency to Barbara. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "Because she's my sister and I love her, but what she's doing is wrong. She's hurting people. She's hurt you. And this lawsuit is insane. She's convinced herself that you and Barbara are part of some conspiracy to destroy her. She talks about it constantly. It's all she thinks about." She pulled out her phone and showed me text messages. Karen had sent her dozens of messages, some in the middle of the night, rambling about HOA bylaws, property values, and how Sarah Mitchell was going to ruin the neighborhood. I showed these to her lawyer, Patricia Say. He told me they weren't relevant. But I think they are. I think they show that Karen isn't thinking clearly. I think they show this lawsuit is about her mental health, not about any actual harm you caused. I looked at the documents again. This changed everything. Can I give these to my attorney? That's why I brought them. I made copies of everything. The originals are still with her doctors and former employers. But these copies are yours. Patricia stood up. "I'm probably going to regret this. Karen will never forgive me, but I can't watch her destroy other people's lives." "Thank you," I said sincerely. "This took courage." She smiled sadly. "Not as much courage as you showed at that board meeting. You stood up to her when no one else would, including me." I took the envelope to David Patterson that afternoon. He reviewed everything carefully, his expression growing more serious with each page. "This is significant," he said finally. "This suggests Karen has a pattern of behavior that predates your HOA situation. It could be grounds for a psychological evaluation as part of the discovery process. Will that help dismiss the lawsuit? It might. Or it might lead to a settlement, if Karen's sister is willing to testify about her mental health concerns. And if we can document that Karen stopped taking her prescribed medications, we could argue that her emotional distress claim is not caused by your actions, but by her own untreated mental health condition." Ex-wife David filed an amended response to the lawsuit that included Patricia's information. Karen's lawyer immediately filed a motion to exclude it, claiming it was irrelevant and prejudicial. The judge scheduled a hearing for July 15th, 2024, exactly 1 month after the board meeting that started everything. In the meantime, life went on. My garden continued to thrive. The tomatoes were ripening, turning from green to deep red and purple. The beans were producing prolifically. Every evening, I'd spend an hour tending my plants, finding peace in the simple act of caring for growing things. Barbara formed the HOA Reform Committee, and they worked quickly. Within 3 weeks, they drafted new guidelines that were more reasonable. Gardens were allowed without special approval as long as they were maintained. Holiday decorations could stay up longer. Paint colors had a wider range of options. Children could draw with chalk. The neighborhood started to feel different, friendlier. I saw kids playing basketball in driveways, saw chalk hopscotch boards, saw other families starting small vegetable gardens. Mrs. Patterson planted new roses. The Rodriguez family's son painted another mural, this time on the side of their garage, with full HOA approval. It was beautiful, a colorful scene of the community coming together, but the lawsuit loomed over everything like a dark cloud. On July 14th, the day before the hearing, I was working in my garden when I heard someone clear their throat behind me. I turned to see Karen standing at my fence line. My first instinct was to run inside and lock the door, but I held my ground. "Karen?" "Sarah." She looked terrible, thinner than I remembered. Dark circles under her eyes. Her clothes looked rumpled. "Can we talk?" Every fiber of my being screamed no. "But, primera, no debes." She stepped into my yard, looking at my garden. The tomatoes were spectacular now, heavy with fruit. The beans created a lush green wall on their trellis. It was exactly what a garden should be. "It's beautiful," Karen said quietly. "Your garden. It's really beautiful." I didn't know what to say. "I came to tell you I'm dropping the lawsuit." she said. My lawyer doesn't know yet. I'll call him tomorrow morning before the hearing. I stared at her in shock. Why? Because Patricia was right. About everything. Karen's voice cracked. I'm not well, Sarah. I haven't been well for a long time. And instead of dealing with that, I tried to control everything around me. The HOA, the neighborhood, other people's gardens. She looked at me with genuine remorse. I'm sorry. For the fines. For the lawsuit. For making your life hell over tomato plants. I'm so sorry. Karen, don't forgive me, she interrupted. I don't deserve forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that tomorrow morning, this will all be over. And I'm checking myself into a treatment facility. Patricia found one that specializes in OCD and control disorders. I'll be there for 90 days. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, your grandmother would be proud of you. Not just for the garden, for standing up, for being brave, for doing what was right, even when it was hard. Before I could respond, she walked away. The next morning, I was getting ready for the court hearing when Barbara called. Did you hear? She asked breathlessly. About Karen dropping the lawsuit? Yeah. She came by last night. No, not that. Well, yes, that. But something else too. Michael Chun did some more digging into the HOA records. Sarah, you're not going to believe what he found. My phone beeped with an incoming text from Michael. It was a photo of an old HOA document. I zoomed in to read it, and my hands started shaking. The document showed a payment receipt from 6 years ago, $2,500, paid by Karen Hendricks to a board member who'd since moved away. The notation read, consulting fee for a special project. Barbara's voice was urgent. Sarah, I think Karen paid someone to help her push through all those restrictive rules. I think this goes deeper than we thought. Michael's bringing everything to the attorney's office right now. I stared at the garden that had started it all. My grandmother's Cherokee purple tomatoes gleamed in the morning sun. I'd thought this was over. I'd thought Karen's apology meant closure. I should have known better. Can you believe this twist? Just when Sarah thought the battle was won, a whole new layer of corruption gets exposed. What do you think Karen paid for 6 years ago? Have you ever discovered something that completely changed a situation? Drop your theories in the comments. I stared at the photo on my phone, my coffee growing cold in my hand. A payment receipt, $2,500. Karen Hendricks to Robert Sullivan. Consulting fee for a special project. Sarah, you still there? Barbara's voice pulled me back to reality. I'm here. Who's Robert Sullivan? He was on the HOA board 6 years ago, served for 1 term, and then moved away. Michael's trying to track him down now. Barbara paused. Sarah, if Karen paid him to vote for those restrictive rules, that's bribery. That's fraud. This could invalidate every rule change from that period. My mind raced. Which means what? Exactly. Which means the garden restrictions, the paint color limitations, the holiday decoration rules, all of it might be legally void. Michael's bringing everything to David Patterson right now. 30 minutes later, I was back in David Patterson's office, along with Barbara and Michael. David spread the documents across his conference table, like pieces of a puzzle. This is significant, David said, tapping the receipt. If we can prove this payment was made to influence Sullivan's vote, it constitutes fraud in the inducement. Every rule passed during that board session could be challenged. Michael pulled up more documents on his laptop. I found the board meeting minutes from August 2018. That's when most of the restrictive rules were passed. Sullivan voted yes on everything. Every single motion. And look at this. He turned the laptop toward us. Sullivan moved out of Meadowbrook exactly 30 days after that board meeting, sold his house, and relocated to Arizona. Doesn't that seem suspicious? It could be coincidence, David cautioned. We need more evidence. We need to talk to Sullivan. I found his contact information. Michael said. "He's living in Scottsdale." I tried calling, but he didn't answer. I left a message. Barbara leaned back in her chair, looking exhausted. "What do we do now?" David gathered the papers. "I'll file a motion with the court to extend the discovery period. We'll request access to all HOA financial records from 2017 through 2019. If there are other payments we don't know about, they'll show up." Over the next 2 weeks, our little garden dispute transformed into something much bigger. David's motion was granted, and the full scope of Karen's financial dealings began to emerge. It started with small things: payments to landscaping companies owned by her cousin, approval of maintenance contracts with vendors who gave her gift cards. Nothing massive, but a clear pattern of self-dealing. Then Michael found the big one. I was harvesting tomatoes on a Saturday afternoon when he called, his voice shaking with excitement. "Sarah, you need to come to the community center right now. Barbara is already here. You're not going to believe this." 20 minutes later, I walked into the community center to find Barbara and Michael, surrounded by boxers of documents. The conference table was covered in spreadsheets, receipts, and bank statements. "Tell her," Barbara said to Michael. Michael pulled out a folder. "Okay, so I was going through the HOA's bank statements from 2017. I found something weird. A payment of $15,000 to something called Meadowbrook Property Management Solutions." "Okay," I said, not understanding the significance. "That company doesn't exist. I mean, it did exist for exactly 4 months in 2017, then dissolved. And guess who was the sole owner?" I already knew. Karen. "Karen," Michael confirmed. "She created a shell company, hired herself as a consultant, paid herself $15,000 from HOA funds, and then dissolved the company. And here's the kicker. The board minutes from that time show no approval for this expenditure. She just did it." Barbara put her head in her hands. "That's embezzlement. That's actual criminal fraud." "There's more," Michael said grimly. "I found at least 3 other similar payments over the next 2 years. Smaller amounts, different company names, but same pattern. I estimate she took about $35,000 total D-room spun." Karen hadn't just been a petty tyrant, enforcing absurd rules. She'd been stealing from the community. "We have to report this to the police," I said. Barbara nodded. "David's already contacted them. Detective Maria Santos from the Fraud Division is coming Monday morning to review everything." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Karen's apology in my garden, her admission that she wasn't well, her plan to get treatment. Had that all been manipulation? Or was she genuinely remorseful, while also being a thief? Monday morning arrived with unexpected rain. I stood at my classroom window, watching water stream down the glass, when my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello. Is this Sarah Mitchell?" A man's voice, older, with a slight southwestern accent. "Yes. Who's this?" "Robert Sullivan. I got a message from someone named Michael Chun about the Meadowbrook HOA." My heart started pounding. "Mr. Sullivan, thank you for calling back. We have some questions about your time on the board." There was a long silence. I wondered when this would come back to haunt me. "What do you mean? Can we talk in person?" "I'd rather not do this over the phone." He paused. "I'll fly out there. I've been carrying this guilt for 6 years. It's time to come clean." 3 days later, Robert Sullivan walked into David Patterson's office. He was in his late 60s, with white hair and tired eyes. He looked like a man who'd been running from something for a long time. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Sullivan," David said, gesturing to a chair. Barbara, Michael, and I sat along the wall, observers to what felt like a confession. Robert sat down heavily. "I'm not proud of what I'm about to tell you, but it needs to be said." He took a deep breath. 6 years ago, I was going through a divorce. Messy one. Legal fees were killing me. I was desperate for money. Karen approached me at a neighborhood barbecue, said she had a proposal. The $2,500 payment, Micah lost. That was part of it. She offered me $5,000 total, half up front, half after the board meeting. All I had to do was vote for her proposed rule changes, garden restrictions, paint colors, all of it. My hands clenched into fists. You sold your vote for $5,000. Robert looked at me with shame in his eyes. I sold it for what I thought was my survival. I was wrong. I know it then, and I've known it every day since. Why did you move away so quickly? Barbara asked. Because I couldn't live with what I'd done. Every time I saw those rules being enforced, every time I heard about someone getting fined, I felt sick. So I sold my house and left. Thought I could outrun the guilt. He laughed bitterly. Spoiler alert, you can't. David leaned forward. Mr. Sullivan, would you be willing to sign a sworn affidavit detailing this arrangement? I'll do better than that. I'll testify. In court, to police, wherever you need me. It's time to make this right. The next week moved fast. Detective Santos interviewed Robert Sullivan for 4 hours. He signed multiple affidavits. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation into Karen's financial dealings. I was in my garden one evening, my sanctuary in all this chaos, when Barbara came by with news. Karen's been arrested, she said quietly. Embezzlement, fraud, bribery. Her lawyer arranged for her to surrender this afternoon. She's out on bail, but there's going to be a trial. I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad. What about the treatment facility? I thought she was getting help. She never checked in. Patricia told me Karen changed her mind after she found out about our investigation, said she couldn't face admitting to all of it. Barbara sat on my garden bench. Patricia's devastated. She blames herself for giving us those documents. She shouldn't. She did the right thing. Did she? Karen's facing 5 to 10 years in prison. Patricia's sister is going to jail. I looked at my tomatoes, heavy with fruit. Grammy's legacy, thriving, despite everything. Barbara Karen stole $35,000 from this community. She took money that should have gone to maintaining our parks, fixing our streets, improving our neighborhood. She bullied residents for years. She made people miserable. Patricia didn't do that. Karen did. Barbara nodded slowly. You're right. I know you're right. It's just hard to see someone's life fall apart, even when they deserve consequences. The HOA held an emergency meeting to address the scandal. The community center was packed again. But the mood was different this time. People were angry, betrayed, demanding answers. Barbara stood at the podium, looking small under the weight of everyone's expectations. I know you all have questions. I'll do my best to answer them. A man in the back stood up. Tom Harrison, who lived on Pine Street. How did this happen? How did none of us notice? Micah stood up. Because we trusted the system. We assumed board members were acting in good faith. Karen exploited that trust systematically and carefully. Dorothy Martinez raised her hand, tears in her eyes. I voted for those rules. I defended them. How many people did I hurt because I believed Karen's lies? Dorothy, you didn't know, Barbara said gently. None of us knew. But Dorothy shook her head. We should have known. When people told us the rules were hurting them, we should have listened. Instead, we hid behind property values and community standards. We're all responsible. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, the board had voted to invalidate every rule change from 2018. The garden restrictions were gone. The paint color limitations were lifted. Holiday decorations were freed from arbitrary deadlines. It felt like the neighborhood could breathe again. But for me, the real victory came 2 weeks later. I was walking through my garden at sunset, checking on my plants, when I heard a tentative voice. Sarah, I turned to see Mrs. Patterson standing at my fence, holding a small plant. I hope you don't mind me stopping by. Of course not. Come in, please. She entered my garden carefully, looking around with wonder. It's beautiful. Just beautiful. She held out the plant. This is from my roses, a cut-in from the ones my husband planted. I thought maybe you'd like to add it to your garden." I took the plant, touched beyond words. "Mrs. Patterson, I'd be honored. Call me Eleanor, dear. And I want to thank you. If you hadn't stood up to Karen, I'd have sold my house by now. I'd have left my home, my memories, everything. You saved more than your tomatoes. You saved this whole community." Over the next few weeks, my garden became a gathering place. Neighbors would stop by to see Grammy's heirloom tomatoes. Eleanor taught me how to care for roses. The Rodriguez family brought seeds from their family's garden in Mexico. Michael and his wife started a small herb garden and asked for advice. We weren't just growing plants, we were growing community. On a warm August evening, Barbara organized what she called a garden victory party at the community center. Everyone brought food made from their gardens. I made salsa from my tomatoes. Eleanor brought rose hip tea. The Rodriguez family made incredible dishes with their peppers and herbs. Barbara raised her glass of lemonade to Sarah, whose courage transformed our neighborhood. Everyone cheered, but I shook my head. It wasn't just me. It was all of us. Eleanor, the Johnsons, the Rodriguez family, everyone who came to that board meeting. We did this together. Michael added, 2 gardens. May they always remind us what really matters. As we toasted, I looked around at my neighbors, laughing and sharing food, and I thought about Grammy Rose. She'd always said gardens were about more than plants. They were about community, about sharing, about growth. She was right. The trial happened in October 2024. Karen pled guilty to embezzlement and fraud. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to repay $35,000 to the HOA. Patricia visited me one last time before Karen reported to prison. "She wanted me to give you this," she said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from Karen. "Dear Sarah, I know apologies mean nothing after what I've done, but I want you to understand something. It was never about the tomatoes. It was never about property values. It was about me trying to control a world that felt out of control. When I lost my job, when my life fell apart, the only thing I could control was HOA rules, so I held on to them desperately, no matter who it hurt. Your grandmother's garden represents everything I destroyed in myself. Growth, beauty, generosity. I stole from my neighbors. I crushed their joy. I became the very thing I feared most. Someone who takes rather than gives. I'm glad you fought back. I'm glad you won, and I hope someday, when my time is served, I can start my own garden. Maybe then I'll understand what you knew all along. The best things in life can't be controlled. They can only be nurtured." The letter was signed simply. Karen and I folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. Maybe someday I'd forgive her. Maybe not, but I understood her a little better now. What an incredible journey. From tomato plants to prison sentences. This HOA battle exposed corruption we never saw coming. Have you ever discovered someone was completely different than you thought? Share your stories below, because this story has one more twist that'll leave you speechless. I knelt in my garden, my hands deep in the rich soil, transplanting seedlings that would grow into this summer's tomato crop. The morning sun was warm on my back, and somewhere nearby, a mockingbird sang its complex melody. This moment, right here, was everything I'd fought for. "Sarah, you've got to see this," Barbara's voice called from my front yard. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked around to find Barbara practically bouncing with excitement, holding her tablet. "Look." She thrust the screen toward me. It was an email from the National HOA Reform Coalition. They want us to speak at their annual conference in September. About our story, about how we transformed Meadowbrook from one of the most restrictive HOAs in the state to a model of community-focused governance. I read the email twice, unable to believe it. They want us to speak, like, in front of hundreds of people. Thousands, actually. The conference draws attendees from across the country. Barbara grinned. "Sarah, What we did here, it matters. Other communities are dealing with the same problems. Overzealous enforcement, power-hungry board members, rules that hurt instead of help. We can show them there's another way. I thought about the past year, about everything that had changed. I'll do it, but only if we bring Eleanor and Michael too. This was never just about us. Already planned on it. Barbara hugged me. We're going to change HOA culture, Sarah. One garden at a time. After Barbara left, I returned to my garden and found myself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought me here. The transformation of Meadowbrook had been remarkable. After Karen's conviction, the new board, led by Barbara, had rewritten nearly every restrictive rule in our bylaws. But more than that, they'd changed the entire philosophy of how the HOA operated. Instead of looking for violations, board members now walked the neighborhood offering help. Elderly residents got assistance with yard maintenance. New families received welcome baskets with information about community resources. The HOA had become what it was always meant to be: a genuine community support system. The financial recovery had been challenging. Karen had stolen $35,000, and though she was ordered to repay it, that money would come slowly over many years. So the community came together. We held fundraisers, garage sales, a neighborhood talent show that raised $8,000 in one night, with Mr. Chun's teenage daughter's piano performance bringing tears to everyone's eyes. But the biggest change was in how neighbors treated each other. People actually talked. Now waved at each other, helped with groceries, watched each other's pets. The fear that Karen had cultivated for so long had been replaced with something beautiful, genuine community. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Turn on Channel 7 News. Now, I pulled out my phone and opened the news app. Finding the live stream, the anchor was mid-sentence ... And in a surprising development, the Meadowbrook HOA story has inspired legislation. State Representative Amanda Torres has introduced House Bill 427, nicknamed the HOA Transparency and Accountability Act. The screen switched to Representative Torres at a press conference. What happened in Meadowbrook exposed a vulnerability in how HOAs operate across our state. One person was able to embezzle funds, bribe board members, and terrorize residents 4 years before being caught. This legislation will require annual independent audits for all mandatory financial transparency reports, and establish a state oversight board to investigate complaints. I sat down heavily on my garden bench, stunned. Our little neighborhood drama had sparked state legislation. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. Is this Sarah Mitchell? A woman's voice, professional and warm. Yes. Who's calling? My name is Jennifer Hotley. I'm a producer for Real Stories, the documentary series. We'd like to make an episode about your experience with the Meadowbrook HOA. We think your story represents a larger issue about power, corruption, and community resilience. I almost dropped the phone. A documentary about my tomato plants. Jennifer laughed. About much more than tomatoes, Ms. Mitchell. About standing up to injustice. About exposing corruption. About a community finding its voice. Your grandmother's seeds sparked a revolution. That's a powerful story. We talked for 30 minutes. Jennifer explained they'd want to interview me, Barbara, Michael, Eleanor, even Patricia, if she was willing. They'd film the neighborhood, my garden, maybe even include footage from the original board meetings, if we had recordings. There's one more person we'd like to interview, Jennifer said carefully, if she's willing. Karen Hendricks. I went quiet. Karen had been in prison for 8 months now. I hadn't spoken to her since that final letter. Part of me wanted nothing to do with her, but another part, the part that had been transformed by this experience, was curious. I can't speak for her, I said finally, but Patricia might be able to arrange something. After we hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, thinking about Karen, about how power had corrupted her, how desperation had led her to steal, how untreated mental illness had warped her judgment. I didn't excuse what she'd done, but I understood her a little better now. That evening, I was harvesting lettuce when Eleanor appeared at my fence. She'd become a regular visitor, often bringing cuttings from her roses or sharing gardening wisdom. "Sarah, dear, I wanted to tell you something," Eleanor said, sitting on the bench I'd built for visitors. "I'm not moving." I looked up, confused. "Moving? I didn't know you were considering it." "I wasn't, officially, but my daughter has been trying to convince me to move to Florida, to be closer to her. She worries about me living alone, managing this big house." Eleanor smiled. But I told her no, this is my this community, this neighborhood, it's where I belong. And that's because of you, Sarah. Because you fought to make this a place worth staying for. Tears pricked my eyes. "Eleanor, I didn't do it alone." "No, you didn't. But you started it. You stood up when the rest of us were too scared. That courage rippled out and touched all of us." She stood, brushing off her slacks. "My roses are blooming beautifully, by the way. The cutting you planted has taken root. It'll bloom next spring." After she left, I found myself thinking about ripples, about how one action, one moment of courage could spread outward in ways you never imagined. I just wanted to honor Grammy Rose's memory with a garden. I never intended to expose corruption, reform an OAA-inspired legislation, or spark a documentary. But that's the thing about standing up for what's right. You never know where it will lead. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected letter. The return address made my hands shake. Riverside Women's Correctional Facility. I opened it carefully. "Dear Sarah, Patricia told me about the documentary. She asked if I wanted to participate. I told her I'd only do it if you thought it was okay. I don't want to intrude on your story or cause you more pain, but if you're willing, I'd like to talk about what I did, not to make excuses or seek sympathy. To warn others. To show what happens when you let fear and control consume you. To hopefully prevent someone else from making my mistakes. I've been in therapy here. Real therapy. Not the kind I pretended to start before. My counselor says I have severe anxiety disorder with obsessive features, complicated by trauma from my job loss. That doesn't excuse what I did, but it explains the spiral I fell into. I think about your garden every day, about how desperately I tried to destroy something beautiful because I couldn't bear to see it thriving when I was dying inside, about how that Cherokee purple tomato plant, growing despite my efforts to stop it, represented everything I'd lost: hope, growth, connection. There's a small gardening program here at the prison. We grow vegetables for the prison kitchen. I've been learning. It's hard, letting things grow at their own pace, accepting that you can't control nature. But it's also healing. I'll understand if you say no to the interview. I owe you nothing but apologies. But if you think my story could help, I'm willing to share it. The letter was signed, Karen Hendricks, inmate number 89742. I sat with that letter for 3 days, reading it over and over. Finally, I called Jennifer Hartley. "Include Karen's interview," I said. "Her story needs to be told too, not to excuse what she did, but to understand it. Maybe someone watching will recognize themselves before they go down that same path." The documentary filming took place over 6 weeks in July and August 2025. Jennifer and her crew were everywhere, cameras capturing the neighborhood, my garden, interviews with dozens of residents. The day they filmed my interview, I stood in my garden, surrounded by Grammy's thriving tomato plants. Jennifer asked me dozens of questions, but one stood out. "Sarah, if you could go back to that first day when Karen confronted you about your garden, knowing everything that would happen, the lawsuit, the investigation, the public scrutiny, would you still plant those tomatoes?" I didn't even hesitate. Absolutely. Because it was never just about tomatoes, it was about honoring my grandmother's legacy, about standing up to injustice, about community. Those tomatoes represented everything good in the world: growth, nurturing, sharing, life itself. How could I not fight for that? The interview with Karen was conducted at the prison. I wasn't present, but Jennifer showed me the footage later. Karen looked different. Thinner, tired, but somehow more peaceful. Her hair had grown out, and without makeup and designer clothes, she looked almost vulnerable. "I destroyed people's joy for years," Karen said on camera, tears streaming down her face. "I took money that wasn't mine. I used power to hurt instead of help. And the worst part, I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. That's how easy it is to become the villain in someone else's story. You tell yourself you're protecting something, maintaining standards, but really you're just feeding your own demons." She looked directly at the camera. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself, if you're the person enforcing rules without compassion, if you're using power to control others, please stop. Please get help. Before you become me, before you lose everything trying to control things that were never yours to control. The documentary aired on October 15th, 2025. Barbara organized a viewing party at the community center. Nearly 200 residents showed up, filling every seat, standing along the walls. Watching our story unfold on screen was surreal. There was my garden, gloriously green and thriving. There was Eleanor talking about her roses, Michael explaining the financial investigation, Barbara discussing the reform process, and there was Karen, in prison stripes, talking about her journey from HOA president to convicted felon. When it ended, the room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Mrs. Johnson, who'd been fined for her kid's basketball hoop. Then the Rodriguez family joined in. Soon everyone was on their feet, applauding, but they weren't just applauding the documentary. They were celebrating what we'd all done together. The community we'd rebuilt from the ashes of fear and control. Representative Torres attended the viewing. Afterward, she pulled me aside. "Your story moved my colleagues." House Bill 427 passed the state legislature yesterday. The governor will sign it next week. Every HOA in the state will now have oversight and accountability requirements. I couldn't speak. Changes that would affect thousands of communities, millions of people, all because I wanted to plant my grandmother's tomatoes. The next morning, I was in my garden before sunrise, as had become my habit. The sky was painting itself in shades of pink and gold. My tomatoes were heavy with fruit. Beans climbed their trellises. Herbs scented the air with their fragrance. I heard footsteps and turned to see a young woman, maybe 25, standing at my fence hesitantly. "I'm sorry to bother you so early," she said. "I'm Alexis. I just moved into the neighborhood, into the house where Karen used to live. I watched the documentary last night." "Welcome to Meadowbrook," I said, wiping my hands. "Would you like to see the garden?" Her face lit up. "Could I? I've never grown anything before, but after watching your story, I want to learn. My grandmother left me some seeds, too. Marigolds. She loved them." I smiled, thinking about Grammy Rose, about legacies passed down through seeds and stories. "Come on in. I'll teach you everything I know. And next spring, your grandmother's marigolds will bloom right here, next to my grandmother's tomatoes." As I showed Alexis around the garden, explaining about soil and sunlight and water, I realized this was the real victory. Not the lawsuit won, or the corruption exposed, or the legislation passed. The real victory was this. A young woman, inspired by a story, ready to plant her grandmother's seeds without fear. The cycle continued. Growth. Community. Hope. That afternoon, Barbara stopped by with incredible news. "Sarah, you won't believe this. The National HOA Reform Coalition wants to hire us as consultants. They want to help other communities implement the changes we made here. It would be part-time work, but decent pay. Enough to maybe take a sabbatical from teaching for a year if you wanted." I looked at my garden, at the fruits of my labor, literal and metaphorical. A year ago, I was just a biology teacher who wanted to honor her grandmother. Now I had the opportunity to help transform communities across the country. "I'll do it," I said, "but only if we can launch it from right here. From this garden, let people see where it all started." Barbara grinned. "Perfect. We'll call it The Garden Revolution Project. As the sun set that evening, I stood in my garden one last time before heading inside. The Cherokee purple tomatoes glowed in the fading light, exactly as Grammy Rose had grown them, as her mother had grown them, as generations had grown them. I picked one, still warm from the sun, and bit into it. The taste exploded in my mouth, sweet and tangy and perfect. The taste of heredity, of persistence, of revolution. Tomorrow, I'd start planning the Garden Revolution Project. I'd help other communities find their voice. I'd teach them that rules should serve people, not control them. I'd show them that one person, one garden, one moment of courage could change everything. But tonight, I'd just enjoy this tomato. Grammy Rose would have liked that. 3 years have passed since I planted those first seeds. Karen was released from prison last month after serving her full sentence. Patricia tells me she's living quietly in Oregon, working at a community garden, seeing her therapist weekly. She sends me a card every year on the anniversary of that first board meeting. Just 3 words. Thank you. I'm sorry. Meadowbrook is unrecognizable from the fearful place it once was. Gardens bloom on every street. Children's chalk art decorates driveways. Holiday lights stay up as long as people want them. The HOA budget goes to community events, not enforcement actions. Eleanor still lives on Oak Street, her roses winning awards at the county fair. The Rodriguez family opened a small plant nursery. Michael was elected HOA president, running on a platform of gardens, not gates, and me. I still teach biology, but now I spend my summers traveling, helping communities transform their HOAs into true community organizations. The Garden Revolution Project has helped 47 neighborhoods in 12 states so far, but my favorite place is still right here, in my backyard surrounded by Grammy Rose's tomato plants. Because this is where it all started. This is where I learned that the most revolutionary act is simply growing something beautiful and refusing to let anyone make you tear it down. Plant your seeds. Tend your garden. Stand your ground. You never know what might bloom. Thank you for following Sarah's incredible journey from a simple garden to a revolution that changed entire communities. Her story proves that standing up for what's right, even in small ways, can create ripples that change the world. Have you been inspired to start your own garden revolution? What will you stand up for? Share your stories, and let's keep this movement growing. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with anyone who needs to hear it. Remember, change starts with one person, one garden, one moment of courage.